Hello and welcome to another episode of Statford Bridge. A little bit of a different theme. We're recording and streaming Sunday morning on the west coast of the United States. Chelsea smashed West Ham 5-1. And it was a game that I listened back, and I don't often listen back to my old podcast because I don't have an ego like that, but I listened back to the post-Palace episode where I talked a little bit about West Ham, and one of the things that I said in that episode was, hey, Chelsea were fine against Palace, and the corners were pretty good, where, oh, nice, we want to get a big software update warning right now, where one of the things I said about that game was that Chelsea were fine and had a bunch of good corners that on another day would turn into a whole bunch of chances, and all of a sudden it's a really comfortable game that you win super easily. Now, the question, or really the answer, is that West Ham was that game, where Chelsea played basically the same as they did against Palace. Paquetá sticks one in the top corner, similar to the Eze free kick, and Chelsea have a bunch of corners that end up in really, really good chances, and you score them and you win them. And the game is very, very comfortable. And that's where we were. I thought Chelsea played pretty well. 2.7 to 0.7 XG, 12 shots to 12, but 7 big chances to 1. The game is really like 60 minutes Chelsea smash them, they make a bunch of subs and then stop playing. And that's kind of the main takeaway from the game to me. But you go through that and you're like, I don't know, like that's okay. Really nice territorial dominance in terms of box touches, in terms of final third entries, all that sort of thing. West Ham are pretty terrible, and there's really not that much to say about the game side of this, in that like West Ham are a relegation level team, and that's what they're going to be. So winning away from home is whatever. The things that are most interesting to me are, in particular, the lineup. Cole Palmer drops out of the team, but even before Cole Palmer dropped out of the team, we saw the start of both Liam Delap and João Pedro together. Cole Palmer pulls out in the warm-up with a groin problem. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And Estevao makes his first start for Chelsea in a competitive fixture. And the two things that I want to talk about primarily are João Pedro and Estevao, because I think there are two really interesting things. One, I thought João Pedro looked very, very good as not a 9. And if you go back to the original video about his signing, one of the things that I said was the thing that's going to be very valuable about him is he can do striker things from not striker position, to like arrive in the 6-yard box for headers. But he can also do real 10 winger things as a passer, as a creator, as a linker. His assist for the Pedro Neto goal is a really nice pass to the back post. And I don't think Delap had a great game. I think the like gushing over his ability to pin the center backs and his movement is like a little bit overblown. Like he took one shot. It was like a knockdown off of a bouncing ball. I thought his link play was not very good. I thought, yeah, he did pin the center backs. Like that is true. But like, yeah, I don't know how. I think people got a little bit out over their skis with the gushing about what he did, and it is what it is. Like, I think he did legitimately do a good job of pinning Max Kilman, but I think you kind of want a little bit more. And so one of the things to me is like, man, I really hope we keep Jackson. You look at Nico and like, imagine the things you could do with Jackson and João Pedro there together. I think would be tremendously, tremendously valuable to this team. The second half of this is Estevao starts for Cole Palmer as the right winger. Malo Gusto starts over Reece James at right back. Again, I really like that Maresca has been so conservative with Reece James's minutes to keep him from getting injured. And you look at Estevao. Estevao starts as the right winger, but with Gusto as the right back, Chelsea built differently than they would have with Reece James, where now one of the things that was most interesting to me was Gusto was the width holder on the right and Estevao goes inside. After the match, Enzo Maresca very specifically said, we used Estevao in the same position as Palmer inside from the right. And what that says to me is that the plan for Palmer was to start as the right winger to come inside, which means it was always going to be João Pedro as the 10. And that to me is something that brings me a lot of joy. That's a lineup I want to see more of. That's a lineup I want to see a lot of. João Pedro or Cole Palmer off the right, coming inside. Estevao off the right, coming inside, with Neto Gittins as your left winger, guys. That to me is very, very, very appealing. And I thought Estevao was phenomenal. His assist for the Enzo Fernandez goal is like the thing I have been begging our wingers to do, which is drive hard end line and just rip cutbacks. It's one of the things I love about Garnacho is like Garnacho had more cutbacks last season than all of Chelsea's wingers combined. That's really valuable. Estevao has had 2 really big cutbacks in 2 games. He puts one on the plate. It's a 0.8 plus XG chance for Enzo Fernandez. He makes a really, really good run in behind for a Reece James pass and gets a very high-quality chance out of it. Doesn't score, no problem. But we are looking at a guy now who has played 77 minutes plus some added in this game, played 40 minutes in the other game plus some added. So in like 120-odd minutes, Estevao is like 1.5 XG. Now, do I think he's going to be like Mo Salah level XGXA for the season? No, I don't. I don't think he's going to be that. But if he's 0.6, 0.7 XG plus XA per 90, like the ceiling on this team goes crazy. Like if we go back and look at the points projection, which I was working on adjusting this morning, right? One of the numbers for Chelsea was league adjusted Davies in, Davies out. Estevao put up like 10 Davies, a little bit less than that in the Brazilian Serie A, like 8 in Brazil. I translated that across as 4, and then because I thought he would play much less, I cut that in half by his minutes too. So he ended up being like 2.3 Davies added or something like that, which is not a huge number. But if he's just going to be as good as he was in Brazil and he's going to play all the time, like if this number is 18, to give you an example, like let's say it's 5 more, Chelsea, instead of being a 71 point team or whatever I predicted, are like a 77 point team. And that's a huge swing. That's a huge swing when we're talking about these big these big projection models. Like if he's actually really, really good, it totally changes Chelsea's ceiling as a team. And I thought Estevao was very, 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 very good. In terms of the West Ham game, like I really don't have that much else to say. I thought Chelsea were a little bit more comfortable in possession. I think people will broadly attribute that to Tosin. I don't think Tosin had like an excellent game in possession. Like, yes, there were passes that he's playing between the line that are fun and exciting. But a lot of it is like the weight is very wrong. He's overhitting them. He's just like firing them like crazy. I don't think Chelsea being better in build-up was that. I think it's more that West Ham suck and Palace are very good defensively. They drew Nottingham Forest 1-1 today. It is what it is. Other things of note from the match to me, we saw all 5 subs get used. Big fan. If for me, like a nice target for the managers, can you get over 100 sub minutes? And you got over 100 sub minutes. I'm really, really happy with that. Andre Santos coming on 60th minute. Really, really happy with that. Now, Hato coming on for Cucurella to get him some legs. Happy with that. Reece James coming on. Happy with that. Fofana coming back. Happy with that. Gittins, whatever. Now, one of the things that I am cautious about longer term is I really like Gusto as the overlapping wing back. Love that. And as that's quite amusing says in the chat, on Gusto right back over James for that overlapping role. James in theory much better, but it's much more demanding on his body. And for what it's worth, I'm happy enough that Maresca is being overly cautious. I think that point is exactly the point. Is I would love to see Reece James in that role, but if he can't do it physically, what's the solve for you? And is it you just have to live with James inside sometimes, or you have to live with James in the back three, or however you want to do it? But it was very clear to me that having the winger inside and the fullback holding width instead of having the fullback inside was really nice for this team. Lord Flacco says talk about that Reece pass. The Reece pass in depth for Estevao was spectacular from midfield. So I think that is really, really exciting. On the subs, I think one of the things I worry about, and somebody said it in the chat earlier, Elliot Sherman said, is Caicedo playing every minute again? Is that the plan? I think one of the things that I don't love is Caicedo is really, really going to play a lot again. And that's great because Caicedo is awesome. Like, I made this in the projection video that, like, one of the things that I was concerned about this season for Chelsea was because they have the Champions League and because they have better depth, but depth that is not as good as Caicedo, Palmer, so on, so on, so on. I think that if Caicedo is going to play all the time, it's going to be very hard to do. And in situations like this where it's 5-1 in the 60th minute, I understand going Andre for Delap to get João Pedro on, and then you want the midfield three. But I probably would have also done Caicedo in the same moment at that time. I think Enzo you can ride a little bit because you need to work him into fitness, but it is what it is from that perspective. Now, Chelsea play Fulham, who are currently 1-1 with United as we record next weekend. Fulham have looked pretty meh. They've played United about even. United got a penalty in the first half. Before that, they played Brighton, and I thought were like pretty comprehensively outplayed. And then they get a really, 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 really late equalizer off of a corner. Fulham have not done really any business. They gave Chelsea some trouble last year when they pressed in a 5-1-3-1, and then the second game they played a 4 and they could not hang. I shouldn't say they could not hang. Chelsea won it very late, but they were not particularly dangerous in that game. I would expect Chelsea to handle their business in this game pretty comfortably, is how I would look at it. In terms of things that might give you issues, they are not like a super pacey transition team. So like you're not going to get done in the channel wherever the fullback goes. They're also not a like dangerous team to really play through you like crazy. The thing that I would be worried about is, as Roshan Suresh says, Fulham set pieces in this United game have been pretty decent. Cueva needs to lock in. They score off a corner against Brighton to equalize late. I do not know if the goal in this game was also off a corner for Smith Rowe. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. It was not. But Fulham are a pretty solid set piece team. And Chelsea's defensive set pieces so far this season have been just okay. They gave up a couple really, really big chances late on, but we will see how it goes. In terms of the lineup that I would expect for Chelsea, we have no idea where Cole Palmer is at injury-wise. We have no idea. But I would suspect that Chelsea will be pretty conservative with him. And I think that's probably the right call. And so when you think about what is the lineup going to be? I suspect James will come back in to start. I suspect that Estevao will probably get the start again. I do not know if they will go Delap and João Pedro again. Maybe, maybe not. And I suspect the lineup will look very similar to the team that played against West Ham. My only guess would be maybe you get an Andre start for Delap. Maybe you get James for Gusto. Probably get James for Gusto, and that's the one that I would look at in terms of things. But we'll see how it goes. I think Chelsea are in a pretty good place. Like, if you look at the points projection, like, they're a little bit ahead from what their betting market odds were in terms of how many points they should have taken. I think they were like 1.8x points against Palace. They draw, and you're 1.7 or 1.8 points against West Ham. You win, so you come out a little bit ahead. Like, I have no problem with 4 points. And as Josh Otter says, like, given our fixture list, taking it slow makes worlds of sense. I think Chelsea have been pretty smart about how they have taken things so far. So we will see where it goes from there. In terms of transfers, we got some interesting transfers. Not Mark Cucurella. That's not at all who I meant to talk about. Carney Chukwuemeka is off to Dortmund. That is a deal that is done. I don't know where I put my squad thing. Carney Chukwuemeka is done to Dortmund for 20 plus 5 million. Plus what is being called a significant sell-on. Aaron Anselmino is also going to join Dortmund on loan. Dortmund play back three. They're also very thin on center backs. It is not a move that I would have expected him to play a ton of minutes. However, maybe he's going to play a bunch of the first half of the season, and then that cements things for you. On Carney, I am much lower on Carney than everyone else. I think if you look at his history, and we've talked about this pretty extensively, the dude doesn't play. And like, anytime you talk about what he does or doesn't do, it has to be framed in the lens of he does not play. And because he does not play, it doesn't matter what he can theoretically do, because he's 21 and almost 22 and has played 13 career senior 90s. And has been a first-team player since he was 16 years old. So in 6 seasons of being a dedicated first-team player, he has played 13 90s. I think if I include the cups, he's played 18 90s. So in 6 seasons of being a dedicated first-team player, he has played 3 90s a season. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what your potential is. It doesn't matter what I think you can do. It doesn't matter what other people think you can do. If you don't play, it doesn't matter. And so Chelsea paid 18 million euros for him in the first place. I thought that fee was high. I didn't love it. They have gotten out profitably. They have cleared his wages off the books, which are reportedly something like $100,000 a week, which is like a very significant wage number. So like 5 million a year on that gone. You've cleared something like 8 million a year in amortization costs. You make a small profit and you protect yourself on upside with the add-ons and a big sell-on. I think this is very good business for Chelsea. And I think the Anselmino loan is fine. And as Bad Rabbit says in the chat, Gretelmino joining a German club fits the story narrative. Tell him to avoid gingerbread houses and trails of sweets. Anselmino, Gretelmino is maybe my favorite Sebsi bit on Twitter. With that, Chelsea have a number of bodies they still have to move out. Raheem Sterling and Ben Chilwell are still there. Nico Jackson's future is up in the air, which I hope it remains up in the air, because that means he's going to stay. Christopher Nkunku, no idea where a deal is headed with that. Axel Disasi, Datro Fofana, Alfie Gilchrist, a number of academy players. Tyreek George had links to Roma this week. The last week of the window is fairly important for Chelsea's business. But that's everything I had. So if the chat has questions, we can answer them now, and we'll tack on 5 minutes to this pod, and then we'll wrap it up there. Will Farrell says in the chat, it would be so funny if this was actually Will Farrell, even though it's not spelled that way. What do you think the chances are of Jackson being reintegrated? And I think this is a good question, because I think the answer is actually really high. Because if you look, right, Nico Jackson. Jackson is very good. He's also very selfless. He works really hard, and he tries really hard. He presses, he runs off the ball, he runs channels, he holds the ball up and links play for others, and so on and so on and so on and so on. And you look at it and you say, okay, like, how hard is this guy going to be to reintegrate? Well, off the rip, I don't think Jackson strikes me as a guy who has like an attitude about it. Like, I don't think he's going to come and phone it in. The second thing is, I think Chelsea very correctly have looked at the striker market and said, we don't really have to sell him. And this is the price for a striker of his caliber. We're not going to sell him unless we get a big number. And I think that's correct. And so when you put in that, like, he's a pretty selfless guy, he doesn't need the ball to be good, he works really hard, doesn't seem to have a huge attitude. Also, Chelsea are going to put a really big number. I think he's not going to move, and I think he's going to stay. And if he's going to stay, Chelsea are definitely just going to use him because he's really good. They're certainly not going to bomb squad him. He's way too good a player, and that would nuke his value. He's way too good a player to do that. So I don't think that's going to happen. So if he stays, I think he will be reintegrated. So I would say the chances are, if you made me a number, I would say 80%, something like that. Sander Green Carlson, in the same vein, asks, if the club moves Jackson for Omega, what would you say? If the club decided next year, like, we're going to move Jackson because we think it's time to move him on, we haven't seen as much progress as we want, we're going to take 65 minutes or whatever, we're going to take 65 million or whatever it is, and then we're going to bring Omega in, I think is very reasonable business. I think across the many competitions, with João Pedro being a flex option as a winger, as a 10, carrying 3 strikers is really valuable. I think if one of those strikers is African and Jackson, you have to carry 3 strikers. You cannot not carry 3 strikers. But I think the way squads are built today, the best place to be is you carry 2 guys who can really only play striker, and you carry 1 guy who can like do 50% of his minutes as a striker. And that's a good place to be. And there's a lot of chat in the chat about a loan with an obligation and blah, 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 blah. And, you know, it's entirely possible that something like that happens. I think even loans with obligations, it will be very difficult for the teams still in the market for strikers to come up to Chelsea's number. Like, I can't see a world where Villa can get to 65 without doing like PSR swappy stuff with Morgan Rogers. And if that happens, I'll be real annoyed, because I don't think Morgan Rogers is very good at all. Like, Morgan Rogers is a guy who, like, if you watched him yesterday for Villa in a game they are losing against the worst Brentford team since they got promoted, he turned the ball over 15 times and did nothing. Like, there's just not that much there to me. So we'll see what happens there, but I would be very opposed to to something like that. And Bad Rabbit says, I think we're waiting on Newcastle. If Isak goes, Jackson for 80 is fair. And I think that is correct. I think that's going to be the direction it goes, is that it will be, if Newcastle move Isak, Jackson will go there for a big number. I do not think they will end up moving Isak, though. I think they have put their feet in the ground and they are not going to move him. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. Anyways, I think that's all for the questions that we're going to have on the podcast side. So we're going to call that a podcast there. Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like it, share it, subscribe it, all those sorts of things. And we are going to keep streaming. But as always, enjoy the soccer.